Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. There are 4 different gold-silver ratios out there. Let's explore. When you buy gold and silver, people think, well, you have to make a choice as to which one is a better value. And that is what we're going to talk about in this video, and why it may or may not be wise to trade the ratio between gold to silver. And all of that is an account to how it is measured from one metal to the other. Some people think it doesn't matter because of where things are going, especially in this economy these days. Your better bet is just to accumulate, and that is true. But as far as measuring value, one of the ways we do that between the two metals is through the ratio. And the ratio tells us a lot of different things. But in this case, it can tell us 4 different things because we're really looking at 4 different ratios. The first is the most popular, and that is the spot price ratio. That's right. This is the one that we see publicized the most often, but is also many times the most misleading. That's right. Gold and silver. 2 amazing metals for sure, but boy, they tell a different story as to how their prices are realized throughout the world of precious metals and in the marketplace. Silver is seen as a metal that holds 2 roles, the duality metal, I call it. It is mostly seen as an industrial metal. Though precious, it is also seen as a hedge against economic instability and as money. Gold, much more treasured and valued. It is by far the metal that is the ultimate hedge and is seen more as money than it is as an industrialized metal, because it is treasured. And so therefore, especially in this day and age, we're seeing a very wide gap between the gold and silver price. And that is what we are measuring here with the gold to silver ratio. It is a measure of price between the 2 metals. It is not necessarily a measure of value. However, price and value many times can be conflated, especially through the annals of history. Its price structure helps to determine its value in due course. So the very first measure is that spot price ratio. Now, there are several subcategories of spot price, and the one is the bid and ask price. The ask price is the price that most bullion dealers use for their markups on premiums when you purchased either metal. The bid price is the price that typically is used when you want to sell those metals back, and typically, in many cases, you are going to be given a percentage under bid price. So you have to take that into account when you are calculating a gold-silver ratio. Even though it's the most publicized, it is the most really unrealistic measure of gold and silver ratio when it comes to each of us out there. As of the recording of this video, it is well over 100 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. On that same line with spot price is our second measure of gold and silver ratio, and that is the futures markets. Now, typically, those numbers are very little between what the spot price is. But in uncertain times, especially in the times we live in right now, there can be a widening between the futures prices and the spot prices. And so therefore, they are reflected more on what the future demand will be for these metals. And so there is a spread out there. And so that is another calculus that is probably, in a way, more realistic, because we're finding in cases like that where bullion dealers are using futures prices to measure the gold to silver ratio. And in order to sell the precious metals to us, the buyers. And so therefore, it is something to take into account whenever you're making these purchases, as bullion dealers oftentimes have higher spot prices that they base their sales on. The third ratio is what you buy the precious metals for as a consumer. When we buy precious metals, we want to make sure that we are getting the best deal possible, especially if we were accumulating these metals solely as a hedge against economic instability. And so therefore, that is the ratio that matters the most whenever we're making a purchase. During this lockdown, we have seen the gold to silver ratio as high as 123 to 1. Well, that's the spot price ratio. But on the buy ratio, whenever you make a purchase, you calculate to see what you would buy an ounce of gold for and an ounce of silver for. It comes out to around the mid-70s to 1. So that is the ratio that you would take into account whenever you're buying the purchase price of both metals, which is really what matters the most at the point of sale. And that is crucially important because that is what you have in it. That is where you measure your dollar cost average. You take that into account if you ever do need to sell, or if you're holding the metals in order to make a trade in the future. But going back to what number one, the spot price ratio, that is ever changing day by day. And so that's why that the gold to silver ratio only matters in the spot price at the time of posting, but it really makes the most sense to incorporate the buy ratio. So when you make a purchase, that purchase ratio, and whether it be 75 or 76 to 1, that is what matters then when you go to make that buy. That's going to weigh your decision, especially when you take into account premiums. Because premiums, folks, that is what is most often ignored when you consider the spot price ratio. People don't think about the premiums that are tied into them when you want to actually make that trade. And that's where it matters, is those premiums that typically will be lost, as well as a loss in spot price if the metals drop, if you do make a trade. And that leaves us to number 4, the sell ratio, which is really the most important, because whenever you go to sell the precious metals, you're going to take a hit on the premiums lost. If the spot price remains exactly the same as when you bought it, you're essentially out. And so if you go to make the sell, or if you want to just make a trade, you're at the mercy of whoever you're making the trade with. If it's a local coin shop or a local dealer, and you want to bring in 76 ounces of silver to trade for an ounce of gold, will he do that based off of your buy ratio or your purchase ratio? I don't know. Some may not. Some will say, well, we're going to essentially work it as if it was you're selling it back to us. So you're selling us back 75 or 76 silver eagles, and then you can buy from that money this 1 ounce gold eagle, but you're going to pay a premium for it. And that means that it's going to go up. There's not a whole lot of dealers who would make that trade. Some may not. But that is something you have to take into account, is loss of premiums, loss of spot price, or, on the other end of the spectrum, gaining in spot price. If both of these metals go up in price, but the ratio remains the same, how is that going to affect the trade one way or the other? Other factors are demand for silver or gold during a particular time. You may trade these to any particular, either online or at a brick and mortar local coin shop, and they may have plenty of silver eagles and may not want to make that trade. Or even vice versa, where you have some gold that you want to trade for silver, they may not want to make that trade because they have enough of that which you want to trade. So all things to take into account here for sure. I know a member of the community contacted me about this subject, and I thought it was important to discuss, because whenever you do make a trade for silver or gold for silver, you have to take into account premiums, you have to take into account spot price, and you have to take into account the willingness of whatever entity that you are making the trade with to consider. You know, the gold to silver ratio that is published, that we look at, just gives us an indicator of how the precious metals are seen. And it is clear right now, as high as the gold to silver ratio is, that gold is seen as the more stable hedge against economic instability, as the ultimate form of wealth. Silver is seen more as an industrial metal during these times, at least for now. But nonetheless, both metals are rising, both are being viewed accordingly, and I believe that as we progress throughout the ages, that we will see probably some normalcy between the two metals in due course, but it's anybody's guess. Both metals are amazing. Both have been used as money for thousands of years, or seen as money, and more recently they are money. But even though they're not used as a means of exchange, we hold them to protect ourselves against an ever devaluing dollar, as the Federal Reserve continues to inject liquidity into the markets and print money, print currency as if it's going out of style. So I think it's wise to hold both metals, but I do believe in preserving wealth in a manner such as this with gold and silver. I'm not one to really trade the ratio in any manner or form. I believe in, when I feel like I have enough of one metal, well, I accumulate the other. And typically that's what I've been doing, because silver is easier to buy, and there's nothing wrong with buying it. But I believe that in due course it's wise for even the most ardent silver stackers to accumulate a bit of gold to further diversify and to further protect themselves from economic instability out there. And it's tough. It's tough to save up to buy 1 ounce of gold. For sure, it is a challenge to do. If you can find fractionals at a decent price, that's certainly a wise thing to do. But nonetheless, what are your thoughts about the gold to silver ratios, the 4 different ratios that are out there? Post your thoughts below. I want to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.